Welcome, everyone. My name is Tim Grant. I'm your host this evening for what is going to be an exceptional webinar. I'm just utterly delighted to have Cliff Knapp as our presenter this evening. When I began working on Green Teacher magazine 20 years ago, I was already from day one hearing the name Cliff Knapp, Clifford Knapp. Cliff was at that time already teaching a graduate outdoor education course for Ontario educators, typical of the kind of outreach that he did and the support that he provided for outdoor and environmental educators now for a few decades. Just one small example. I've had the great pleasure of working with him in the last couple of years. He wrote a wonderful, most recently did a wonderful, actually, Cliff, I guess you contributed twice in the last couple of years to our Green Teacher magazine. You did a wonderful piece called Developing a Sense of Place Through Native Science Activities in Green Teacher number 88. You co-authored an article with Brad Daniel on nighttime hikes, which is another one of my personal favorites. And for those that don't know you, I'll just say a couple of things. You're a professor emeritus in the Department of Teaching and Learning at Northern Illinois University. You've been retired for a couple of years, but remain active in the field of outdoor teaching and learning. You've been reading, writing, traveling, and teaching in the United States and abroad for many years. You were a featured speaker at the first place-based education seminar in Singapore. You delivered the address at the 37th Annual International Association for Experiential Education in Montreal. You've got a chapter in an upcoming book, Place-Based Education in the Global Age. The list of credits go on and on. You're one of those people who have really contributed a lot in so many places. It's really hard to kind of summarize them all. But I've really been delighted when you accepted the invitation to do this evening's webinar. And before I turn things over to you, let me just give everybody, especially those of you who have not been in one of our webinars before, just a quick sense of where we're going over the next hour. In a few moments, I'll turn it over to Cliff Knapp, but basically he'll present for a little while, and then we'll turn it over to you for questions. And there'll be a special slide that'll appear on the screen at the end of his presentation in which you can type in those questions. But as you've already seen from those who've made comments in the chat box, in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, that's a place where you can either type a message to me that you're having technical difficulties. You can comment on anything that Cliff says in his presentation. You can respond to anyone else's comment in the chat box. And the way you do that is in the extreme bottom left-hand corner, you'll see the horizontal box that says Main Room. And to the right of that, a blank horizontal box. And that's where you type in anything you wish and then hit Enter on your keyboard, and that will propel it with your name up into the chat room. And as I say, if we have a fairly large group tonight, there'll be, and we're making good use of the chat box, you'll see comments arriving quickly and frequently into the chat box. But that's a good use of it, and I hope you'll feel free, please, to make good use of it yourselves over the next while. So if you have a question for Clifford Knapp and you don't want to wait until his presentation is over, if you have a comment, please use the chat box. That would be great. Say a word or two. I mentioned that Clifford has contributed a couple times to Green Teacher. This is our nonprofit magazine that we've been publishing for about 20 years. Magazine for youth educators in which we try to share the most innovative articles, activities, and lesson plans developed by environmental educators, mostly in North America, but increasingly beyond. In the last 10 years, we've had the pleasure of publishing 6 books in 10 years, and those contain many articles that have been originally published in Green Teacher, but which were rewritten for the books. Green Teacher is, as many of you know, an unprofitable nonprofit, and if you indeed enjoy this evening's webinar or have enjoyed past ones, I strongly encourage you to take out a subscription, buy a book. Either of those things will help us continue to with this series of free webinars. And unless I forget to mention it later on, for those of you who need a certificate, just send a quick email to me, tim@greenteacher.com, and afterwards, or even in the midst of the session, and I will happily do that tomorrow or later tonight. And for those at the end of, in 60 minutes from now, or 55 minutes, assuming we're running out of questions, we will put up an end of session evaluation slide. I'll ask you to indulge us in answering some quick questions. And those of you who are willing and do follow through with that will be eligible to win one of 2 free 1-year digital subscriptions. So without further ado, let me turn it over to my good friend and a wonderful contributor to outdoor and environmental education in North America for many, many years, Cliff Knapp. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Tim. This is a new kind of teaching for me because I'm used to taking people out, walking in the woods and the fields, or at least having faces sitting before me. But all I have is a screen. Beautiful pictures on it, but so I will be doing the best I can under these conditions. I've been teaching for 50 years, and so here's a new experience. Before we go too far into this, I would like to invite all of the participants to put in their name and where they're from. What place do you now occupy? And then maybe in a few words, a favorite or a special place. So I will be able to look at those as they come in, and we'll be using this information later on in the talk. So if you could say who you are and what place, and then a favorite place or a special place. All of this may not fit on the screen, but let's see what you put on there. And while you're doing that, I will start our presentation here, and maybe I can take a peek here and there to see where you people are. And I hope that, now they're starting to roll in. This is just like a geography lesson. I wonder if I know where all these places are. Oh, this is very exciting, though. I'm appreciating the people who are there. And even if I can't see you, and even if I can't take you on the walk, we will certainly have a great time, because I love this topic. I love this topic. And I hope if you don't already, you will when we finish. Well, we're only scratching the surface. When we're going to be exploring place-based education, what, why, and how, as well as we can do in the short time we have. Thank you very much for putting those places and favorite places on that screen. So feel free to communicate with one another. If my conversation gets boring, just go to the conversation of the others. So you really can't lose. And you don't have to...
Cliff, I have to say, I think that's utterly unlikely.
Well, let's be optimistic and say it won't happen, right? But we will be giving you, in a few days, and Tim will know when, a 10-page supplement to this PowerPoint. And that contains some of the details that are not provided on the screen, or I won't even give you tonight unless asked. And it will also give you more resources. So that 10-page supplement, I think, will help you. So you can just concentrate on thinking of questions and thinking about, where you want to go with this. So here we go. A sense of place. Do you have a sense of place? I know that I can recall having a sense of place. And just let me tell you a little story about my teaching. I began in 1961 teaching in a high school And when I took my students out to identify trees on the school ground or build a nature trail, or we built a weather station and we predicted weather, and then we forecast this and over the loudspeaker so that the whole school could hear it. All of these things that we did, I was calling outdoor education. Then let's go forward a few years. In 1972, when I was teaching 7th grade science, I would take my classes to a local water and sewage treatment plant, a geology museum, a forest to study tree management practices. We even went on the rooftop to take air samples to see if there was much particulate in the air. Well, all of these things I described as environmental education. And then Tim mentioned before that I was teaching at a graduate level at Northern Illinois University, and then I would take my students to a local bookstore to find out what role that played in the community. Or I might take them for a walk down the business district to look at architectural styles. Or we might go to an arboretum to study tree damage from pollution. Well, then, and only then, did I call it place-based education. So in many ways, this is an evolution of terms, and it's maybe a more sophistication of what we're doing. We have greater understanding. So that's just a little story to show you about the change of terminology, and we can talk more about terminology when we continue on. But I like this first one because I heard the artist Alan Gusau in the early 70s tell me that a place is a piece of the whole environment which has been claimed by feelings. I really like that. I'm wondering if you have had your feelings claimed at any place. Gary Snyder said it a way that I like too. A place is part of what we are. Who are you and how are you like the places that, for example, that favorite place that you listed? For those coming in late, we asked each person to mention a favorite place or a special place. Well, how are you like that place? Well, why learn? Why learn about place? There's obvious reasons. We need the food, water, and shelter and air from a place, so we ought to understand more about it. We need some security of places, too. Do you have a place that you really feel you belong? Does it give you safety and feelings of peace? How about certain goals that you might have? You might have a special goal and a special place where you like to do it, and that place helps you meet that goal. Well, you also have opportunities for reflection and problem solving and stress release. Does your favorite place or special place give you some peace and relaxation? I wonder. And then the last one, self-awareness. Maybe it's just a feeling over time that makes you feel good about being in a spot. You know who you are. It's in a form of security too. So maybe there's others. Do you have any other reasons why we should study a place? Where we are has everything to do with what and who we are. Does that resonate for you? In my reading, I found this chart by Lowe and Altman, and they outline different aspects of place attachment. They were also talking about sense of place. I think those are synonyms: place attachment, sense of place. So maybe you could think back to your favorite spot that you mentioned, or your special place that you mentioned. And as each one of these components comes up on the screen, you might want to think about how your favorite or special place relates. So let's take a little exploration of these six. Well, emotions and feelings. Do some places make you mad or scared or what? Do you have any feelings about this? Maybe some of them make you sad. Maybe, I hope, they make you glad. So how do you feel about this place? Of course, we have more than one favorite or one special place, don't we? So just pick one for example here and run through some of these questions. What parts of that place then evoke these feelings? What about that place brings these out? Well, time. Think about the time that you have spent in this special place. Would you like to return? How does time pass in those places? Well, this is a favorite one of mine. Thoughts and facts. I guess I use my head a lot. I like to think, sometimes too much late at night, but I'll turn it off sometimes. What do you know about this place? And how is this place like or not like you? And what other places are like this one? Can you compare place to place with others? When I was speaking in Singapore at that place-based education seminar that Tim mentioned, there was a staff in what they call the Institute for Experiential Learning. Now, that would be great for every school to have, but this staff was working on a set of questions that they were going to ask their students when they went to a particular park. And I think you might have seen some others of these inventories. In fact, I can think way back to the 1980s when there was a questionnaire. It was titled, "Do you know where you are?" And it starts out, "Where does the water you drink come from in your town? How much rain fell in your town last year? What is the phase of the moon? I remember last night what the phase was. It was beautiful, and it was full. You probably had the same moon as I did. All right, another thing, when you flush your toilet, where does the waste go?" These are all sorts of things that you might want to know about your community. So think about what you know, and think about what you want your students or your program participants to know. Well, people and relationships are definitely part of place. I think you can answer these questions. Who do you know well in that place? Are there other people at that place you'd like to get to know better? Is it important that people be there for you and that maybe not? How important are these relationships that you have? And maybe it's even just sharing what you learned at the place when you get back. But places do have people as part of them. Activities. Well, in some ways, I'm an activity junkie. I love to get activities. And that's why teachers thrive on a new good activity, like the night hike activities or the native science activities or two-eyed seeing that we wrote about in The Green Teacher? What do you like to do in these places? How do these activities enrich your life? What other things would you like to do in this place? So there's lots of questions to ask here. I can think of many people in my life. I went to Southern Illinois University to be with my mentor, Dr. L.B. Sharp. So I wanted that person so much, I had to go to his place. Scale, and that is how big. Is it a big place or a small place that you listed? How about the size and how it affects you? So there's lots of these issues to think about. And when I was at the Star School in Loop, Arizona, I taught a lesson to some kids about naming places. I love to do that. And one of the activities involved having the children go outside the school, and they were to name 3 places that they saw. And then they come back, and it was based on what was happening there. What was the event, or what was it looking like? So they came back, and then we, in turn, asked each one for them to say the name, and we would guess where that person was. They loved the game. They loved it very much. Well, what stories do places tell? And how can stories make the place safe? James Raffin, Canadian, who I respect a lot, did some research, and he studied some indigenous people and some Euro-Canadian people up in the Northwest Territories, and he came up with 4 different kinds of knowledge. And one deals again with that game that we played with the kids, naming places. The other, stories, telling stories about that land. And of course, the experiential. I think, for me, when I helped my good friend do a sugar bush, and we gathered the sap, and then we brought that sap to maple syrup and maple sugar, that experience now has colored the way I look at maple syrup and having pancakes each Sunday morning when I have them. So the experiences that we have in a place are very, very important. And then the last one that he listed, numinous, which means a special spiritual bond. I think we all can think about some of the special spiritual bonds we have with places and with peoples. And sometimes it's really hard to explain what the feeling is. You can't put words to some things like that. Well, let's look at place-based education, and there are many definitions. In fact, there are many names, as we were suggesting, for the same kind of thing. This one is by Amy Powers, and she did a study of 4 different place-based education programs in the East. But you might say, well, is there a difference between place-based education and outdoor education, or environmental education, or bioregional education, or ecological education, or environment as an integrating context, or community-based education? And I could go on and on. In fact, I have done a study and found that there's over 78 different terminologies that I think all describe a similar kind of activity that we're doing here. So if you don't like place-based education, you can change the name. A lot of people have done that. Well, Gregory Smith looked at 5 different kinds of programs. Cultural studies, what comes to mind there is the Foxfire series. And when I was teaching, we wrote 10 books with our graduate students based on their experiences in the community, talking to people. Well, we can think of lots of examples of nature studies, I think. We don't even have to elaborate on those. Real-world problem solving, that's one of my favorites. When I went to the Illinois Math and Science Academy, that class was dealing with the introduction of wolves. I think it was into Minnesota. And they talked to people, and they even did some testifying at a hearing. That's really getting into it. Internships and entrepreneurial opportunities, career choices. And induction into community means that they get so involved with the community and how it's run that they have roles to play and maybe even shadowing some of these people. Well, Aristotle had something to say about place too. The power of place. Do you know places that you would say have power? In and of themselves, power. I think there have been several books written on the power of place. Find Deloria, for one. Well, Greg Smith found that all of these programs that he studied had certain commonalities. Immediate surroundings were used. The students created new knowledge as well as, using the old. They were based on questions and concerns, and that's how they built the curriculum. Teachers acted in a new way sometimes as guides and co-learners. They were what I like the term brokers of community resources. They were the middle people. Community and school was then seen as a blend. In other words, no barrier stood between the school and the community. Well, there's lots of goals. Again, depending on who you read, this is from Powers, and she isolated these goals. And the one I like, well, there's lots I like, but the academic performance in the students, that was one of the goals. And yes, in some cases that is true for place-based education. There's some evidence that grades are improved with place-based education. Of course, a lot of people now in this political climate want more civic participation. That's often the goal, if that is the way you plan the curriculum. Because of my interest in indigenous people, I like Annie Peaches and what she said. The land is always stalking people. The land makes people live right. The land looks after us. Do you know any places that are telling us something about our character or our morals and our values? Well, perhaps. I looked at place-based education. I've got tons of books and I've read many articles, and I tried to pick out some of the big ideas. And I'll go over these very quickly. There's lots of definitions and lots of characteristics. There's no one blueprint that fits all. Living well in place, that one I believe was said by David Orr. But there's different ways of saying living well in place. You could say ecological sustainability. You could say bioregional education. You could say ecological ethics. Well, the next one, connecting to the land, has many synonyms. Place attachment, we mentioned already. Rootedness, topophilia, biophilia, sense of place, becoming native to the place, geopiety. All of these deal with connecting. Well, one of the concerns that we're really now addressing is that alienation from nature. Well, Richard Louv of Last Child in the Woods, he called it nature deficit disorder. But you could also call it placelessness or landlessness or ecophobia. I think David Sobel called it that. So these are all the same thing, but known by different names. And a place-responsive curriculum could be called a pedagogy of place or earth literacy. And then reading the land and culture, we mentioned the inventorying of places, of two-eyed seeing, And one program that I like a great deal is the one in California, River. Let's see. Now I'm blanking on that one. River of Words. There it is. And that one I really like because they do art and poetry in that place. How are you like the places? You know, there's a lot of information about human identity and place, and also sacred places. Well, we've run through these pretty quickly, and I hope that these have stimulated your questions, because this is the last slide. And I'm just wondering, you know, can that spirit give you humility and can give you happiness? Well, with that, I think it's time to turn it over to the brains out there. Tim, how are we doing on time?
We're doing well. Clifford, thanks so much. Why don't you move us to the next slide there?
Sorry, Clifford.
Great. Thank you very much. That's terrific. And folks, as mentioned earlier, here's your opportunity to ask a question. As you've got a good sense, Clifford Knapp has really been involved in place-based education and a deep thinker about this for many, many years. So you've got a great opportunity to type a question into that white box at the top of the screen. Press submit. If you have another question, then you can type in a second one then and hit submit, but do those separately. And I will be retrieving them from the back office and passing them on to Clifford. And I want to just while people are doing that, Cliff, just ask you slipped in a word we heard of called topophilia. Can you tell us what that is about?
Well, that's just a love of the land. It's just another way of saying that we love the land and we're connected to it. So there's lots of words that biophilia by E.O. Wilson. He said it a different way. So, you know, they coined terms to get across what they thought was important. Now, just think, if no one has a question, we could have a beautiful 20-minute silence to reflect on all the beautiful places that we've been to. Wouldn't that be maybe useful? How are they coming, Tim?
They're coming fine here. Let me just grab the first one here for us. Well, here's a good question being asked. What about all the other ecosystems other than where we live? Do you think that's, it's a good question to ask in a place-based teaching webinar, but what about teaching about other ecosystems other than the one we live in? Any thoughts?
Oh, yes. I think place-based education doesn't mean that all of the education is restricted to one place. But I think that if we have a thorough knowledge of our own place, we then can understand other places more easily. In fact, we can go up to the global from our own basic understanding of our place and understand global situations, I think, in much greater depth. So, yeah, I think that we're not only talking about limiting a student's education to the local period, but I think that being well-grounded in where you are and is going to help us in all of our learning, because it's an interdisciplinary kind of thing. It's not one subject. It's not science. It's not geography. It's not math. It's not language. It's really about all. And so it works well with integrated learning, cooperative learning, problem-based learning. All of these systems of education work quite well with place-based.
And that's great, Cliff. You highlighted on that list on one of the last slides you put up about the alienation from nature, and I was quite struck by the comments you said. I wondered if you might want to address that. You talked about Richard Louve's, saving us from nature deficit disorder. what to what extent do you think place-based education has the capacity to address the real alienation that young people face? I mean, adults face it too, but our focus here tonight is largely on youth. Uh, Walk through this a little bit. How can place-based education really help address the alienation of young people that most of us face these days?
Well, I guess the obvious response there for me is that if we don't know something, we're going to tend to be afraid of it or maybe apathetic toward it. So the more we know about the place we live, I think the more we would reduce our alienation. Because at each place we study, and it could be urban areas certainly, we will find gems that we didn't know was there. And so we can find nature, and we can also find culture in any place. And so I think it addresses that problem. And some people would think that alienation to the world of nature and the world of people is one of the most serious crises we face as a society. And I think that as technology grows in its pervasiveness, we have a tendency to have that alienation. If not alienation, then apathy. So I think it addresses it beautifully. And I think that most of the listeners out there have read Richard Louv's book. But I would hope if they haven't, they will real soon. But he's not the only person talking about alienation. There's lots of writers, and writers from different areas of sociology and psychology. Eco-psychology is something that is a big area. So you'll never run out of reading when you start pursuing place.
Someone asked, and it's really a two-part question. I'll start with the first. Most of us live in cities now, and it was interesting when we all answered, when you asked us to tell us, about favorite places, most of us talked about, natural areas, Puget Sound. I mentioned a forest in the Ottawa Valley I'm particularly attached to. And so can you kind of comment on what place-based education looks like in an urban setting?
Well, I think that some of the best books in this field have been written by Gregory Smith and David Sobel, and those two especially, and also by David Grunewald. And that book that I mentioned, that I have an article in, is certainly a book to show you examples of where they're doing place-based education in urban areas. So I guess the easy, quick answer is for the people to go to books, some of those books that will be on that resource list. And with that, they can look at the different examples of urban programs. Now, I'm in a rural area here, so I don't have firsthand experience with urban place-based education, but the book's title is Place-Based Education in a Global Age, and that's by Grunewald and Smith. And when they get their supplement to this PowerPoint, they could go to that and read about how kids are, looking at pollution, looking at traffic patterns, looking at how to make their neighborhoods safer. And all of that is place-based education. It's not looking at flowers and trees all the time. It's remember the one solving real-world problems. And there are lots of real-world problems in urban areas. So that would be the simple way for the question asker to get some real good information about what's going on in urban America.
Great, thank you, Cliff. And by the way, there's been a couple of people who've mentioned in the chat box that the question slide has disappeared. It's still on the screen for me, but I think if you're having problems and you can't use that question slide, feel free just to ask the question in the chat box, and we'll I'll try and grab it and relay it. I've got a few questions that have been typed into the back office that I'm slowly working my way through, but feel free to add one in the chat box if you're unable to type a second question or a third question into to the question slide that's on the screen for some of us. Cliff, a related question about that the person was really asking about urban, and I just sort of start that sort of introductory question, was, in urban areas, we're all conscious of all the people who've gone before us, and all of us, in certainly across the United States and Canada, many of us are immigrants, or our parents or grandparents are immigrants to a place. And this question the person was asking was, how do we think about place in relation to the people who've come before us?
Well, I think that as part of understanding place, you need to go back into its history. And if its history is an ethnic history where people came from a different country, a different place, then that's all a part of the study. So, I think that's definitely linked, and we need to, in order to have a better sense of our place today, we need to go back in history to find out what was yesterday. So, to me, it's definitely a part of it and should be there.
Thanks, Cliff. Another person was asking, what would a place-based classroom look like? And I'm thinking that's a big one. But I think it's a good one. And I think what I would do to answer it is to sort of pick a particular age group if you want to jump into it and think of a particular age or grade level and say, well, I think this is what I would, and obviously there's many, many options here, but why don't you take about it?
Yeah, well, I did mention some of the things that I did when I was at the Star School, and I also did not mention, but I want to now mention the Chrysalis School out in Palo Cedro, California, run by Paul and Alicia Kerfell, and that whole school is a place-based school. They have field excursions into the community and into the area, and they go camping, and so that curriculum then pervades the kindergarten through the 8th grade there. And the problem with place-based education curriculum is that one size does not fit all. And so it almost has to be developed in the school district itself or the nature center because the nature center is in a community. And so it's really hard to say, well, here's a typical. And if we look at, what does it mean to be connected to that place? Then we could develop a set of activities. For example, where are the 4 cardinal directions? Do you know that? In fact, the people can ask themselves, in their favorite or special place, can they point to the 4 cardinal directions? And do they know stories about the history of that place? Can they identify some people who live there? Do they know the plants? Do they know the rocks? Do they know the fossils? What animals are there? In other words, going down this list of what does it take to connect to a place, and then from that list, I think you could develop a curriculum. So that's really a hard question to just lay it out and say, well, at 4th grade, you should be studying this. Now, we have to be aware of the standards in the public school system, at least in the States, and maybe you have that in Canada too. But there's so many opportunities to go different places that it's easy to deal with any standards and still learn about our place.
A related question on that very sort of note that you just finished with, someone was asking, how would you go to an administrator in a school and make the case for place-based education? I mean, as this person rightly says, you've talked about standards. That's one of and standardized tests certainly, is a huge driver of education in both in the United States. Technology is another big focus. How would you, for administrators who are focused on those traditional narrow measurements, what recommendations can you provide for how you would approach an administrator about the import and the need for place-based education?
Well, first of all, you'd approach the administrator and get on your hands and knees and beg. But no, seriously, you would go to perhaps first the higher test scores that have been shown to be evident after certain place-based programs have been instituted. I'm looking right now at just a 2-page fact sheet dated November 2007, but it's out of the University of Colorado, the Health Sciences Center, www.cudenver.edu. And they have laid out in 2 pages the research dealing with higher grades, and then more motivation, and then stewardship, greater sense of responsibility and stewardship, and then that mention of civic responsibility and involvement. So I guess I would go right down the list of the benefits that have been accrued over research. And there's a number of different studies that show us that, yes, it is worth the time and the effort. It's not always easy, because you can't go to one textbook and say, oh, here is the chapter on my community. That's difficult. But once you get it, there are so many benefits that it's worth the effort.
Cliff, someone was quite struck by your comment about the importance of learning the history of a place. Can you make any suggestions about how to make teaching about that history more exciting and experiential and connected to place?
Well, I think one of my favorite books on that topic is an old one, and it's called Reading the Landscape of America. Excuse us Canadians, but many of these lessons certainly go across the border. And it's by May Watts. And this has been around for a number of years. And so by reading the landscape, you can use it as a history book. You can read the history. And certainly talking to the old people, the elders, in a lot of the dominant society, the elders are not respected as they are in the indigenous societies. So talking to the elders, to me, is the way to, and that's what Foxfire did. And that's just the way to get at the history of the place. Another good book that relates to the eastern part of the United States is Reading the Forested Landscape by Tom Wessels, Wessels. And once you look at the land as a history book, you can go back years and years if you know what you're doing. And this is one of those big ideas that I expressed in place-based education. I don't know if that's an adequate answer, Tim, but it's the first thing that came to mind.
Oh, that's great. Someone else was saying, we were talking a little bit about the challenges of place-based education in an urban setting. One of those challenges, of course, is that newly immigrants, arrive in our communities, and they obviously have less of a grasp of the place. And for those of us who are working with immigrant children, any suggestions about the kinds of things you would, activities you would introduce that would help them develop more quickly a sense of place?
Well, I think that we'd want to draw upon their experiences in their place and find similarities and differences. That's certainly one way to do that. I have not been in classrooms where there are several languages. I've been fortunate or unfortunate, as the case may be, to have students who speak the same language. But I can certainly see the challenge that, especially, I know in Toronto, many a Canadian has told me stories of how many languages there would be spoken in a class. And New York City would have the same issue. But I think to draw upon the experiences of those people from their places, to look at similarities and tell stories, and then to try to find links to their place as they study it in their new home would be the only way to me would make sense. It's not easy, and nobody said place-based education was an easy path to learning, but if you're dedicated and you believe in it, then it's worth that effort.
And I think that's a great suggestion because it the idea of link, because first of all it connects kids, it helps kids get oriented to be able to draw from the sense of place they had in their home country to their newly adopted country, to make those between them is really brilliant. Another practical question as well. As you know, doing outdoor and experiential education or place-based education is all a lot harder at the high school level. Any thoughts or suggestions on what people who are working with in high schools might do to help develop a sense of place?
Well, I did mention that story about the Illinois Math and Science Academy that I visited. That was a high school, and they were very well involved in a deep study of the introduction of wolves in a new place. I think that in many ways, having a high school opportunity gives you more chance to go into great depth and greater understanding of a place. So, and the fact that it's been studied in history, it's been studied in language and psychology, and certainly science, opens the door for just about any of the disciplines. So I don't think that there's a discipline that we can't link in some way to your place. And that's the way it is in the real world. And remember that disappearing barrier between school and community. I think I would love to have some opportunities at a high school. Now, of course, you do need to get permission, and you have shorter chunks of time and all of the limitations that the system presents. I'm aware of. I was a high school teacher, too, for a short while. But I would just love to have that ability to go deeper as high school students can.
Another question, Cliff, is about kids' observation skills. Any comments about are the kids more observant now than they were in the past, and are there ways that you would suggest that would help deepen and strengthen kids' observation skills?
Well, of course, as an ex-science teacher, observation is one of the science skills that science teachers work on. But I've been doing a little study myself on some of the old-time naturalists, Henry David Thoreau and John Muir and John Burroughs, and I've been going back to some of the old books and seeing how they were naturalists, what skills they put forth to be naturalists. So I'm saying that we can learn from the old-timers about these skills, such as observing. I would hope that the mania for standardized tests that's out there in the schools would not blind the teachers to the importance of skill teaching, such as observation and critical thinking, of course, and a whole list of others.
Great, thank you. Thank you. I was a bit distracted because I was flipping through the chat box, knowing there were a couple questions there, and one person was asking about resources, and I just wanted to reiterate that what you mentioned earlier, Cliff, that you have sent me a large Word document full of resources and references. Really, I've had a chance to scan it, and I will be sending that to all of you. indeed, everyone, I think there was about 215 people who registered for this evening's webinar, and I'll be sometime, if not late tonight, tomorrow, sending an email to everyone letting people know that the archive is available for the session tonight, and you can, of course, pass this on to anyone else you know that couldn't join us this evening. But I'll also attach to that message the document that Cliff has provided us, and I think you'll find it a pretty rich set of resources and references that can really take all of us much deeper into this topic.
If people would like to come to Billings, Montana on March 22nd, I'm doing a whole day place-based education workshop for the Montana Environmental Ed Association. So get your plane tickets right now.
Sounds great. Excellent. I'm not seeing other questions at this point. Are there? Feel free to add them either in the chat box or in the back office. I'll do another quick check to see if I've missed anything in the back office here. One that I failed to ask earlier, Cliff. We've talked about, people who arrive in the country as immigrant children who don't have a good sense of their local place, but of course bring a rich, as you pointed out, a rich experience from their home country to their newly adopted country, whether that's Canada or the U.S. or Australia or anywhere else. But another group that's also particularly, I think, is at-risk youth. And can you talk about the potential or the power of place-based education for at-risk youth, and maybe offer a couple of suggestions about what you would, if you were taking over a program for at-risk youth, what kinds of things you would be suggesting?
Well, just yesterday I met one of our graduates, and she had some people there. She was working on an organic gardening project. She had a small grant, and she was working with some students who were working towards their GED. In other words, they probably were dropouts for various reasons, and they wanted to get back, and they wanted to get that high school degree. And they certainly are at risk, coming from low-income neighborhoods, perhaps. And there was this community gardening project, organic gardening. So there's one classic example, and not that gardens are a new idea as an educational tool, but I just found in the town of Rockford that was happening. So that's just one immediate example that comes to mind. But I think that it has power because of the greater engagement of the students. Why did they drop out in the first place? At-risk students are tending to drop out. So if they become more engaged and excited about learning, wouldn't that be reason enough to stay in? Again, no simple silver bullets here, but I think that if we work on that angle, if learning is fun, if exploring your neighborhood has some rewards, if it's exciting, if I'm engaged, then I want to stay in school.
Cliff, you mentioned earlier, and it got past a few of us, the website that presents the research about how place-based education can improve student test scores. Was that the SEER study, or?
It's called Children, Youth, and Environment Center for Research and Design at the University of Colorado, and that website was www.cudenver.edu. It's fact sheet number 2. But I want to mention also the Children in Nature Network that Richard Louv and Cheryl Charles started a few years ago. They have 5 volumes of research dealing with linking of children and nature. And part of that deals with increased achievement. So I would direct them to the Children and Nature Network website, and they would to go and explore the 5 volumes of research that's available. A new 5th volume just came out, and it's excellent. I have all 5. So there's ways of getting that information, and I think the Children in Nature Network is one good source.
No, that's great. And I will, in fact, if you want to share me the Denver, share with me by email the Denver one, I'll include that in the Edis one. I'll put in the Child and Nature Network URL or the website address so that when I send out the follow-up email. Okay, what I'm gonna do here is bring the end of session evaluation up on the screen here and ask everybody to indulge us, if you would, in filling this out. As I mentioned, 1 or 2 of you will win a free 1-year digital subscription.
There it is.
And there it is. And you can use the bar, the blue bar on the right-hand side, to scroll down to there's 2 open-ended questions. The others are multiple choice. It'll take you but a minute to do that. And if you have additional questions for Cliff, I didn't ask him ahead of time whether he can stay for a few minutes, but I can certainly hang around a bit. And if we've got more questions, I'm happy to keep going for a little bit as well.
And Tim, if that scroll down bar does not work to expose the full screen, you can just pull down the whole larger screen or the box. That because my scroll bar doesn't work.
Right, that's an excellent suggestion. That's right. You sort of drag that down. Shrink the list of participants in the chat room by bringing that whole bar down. Right. Just below the talk button. That's a really good point. Another one is just, of course, the cursor anywhere on the screen and use the roll device on your mouse to get you to the bottom. But if you have trouble with it, let me know, and we can also, in the link that I'll send tomorrow as well, it'll also have an opportunity for those that didn't fill out the didn't fill out the questionnaire. There's another, you can do that via SurveyMonkey as well, and we'll make sure that, and what I do, by the way, everyone, is your candid comments are particularly welcomed. I do share them with the presenter, although I delete the names, so please answer as fully and completely as you can. It's very helpful too. And I see one person's already having a little bit of problem with the questionnaire disappearing. Hopefully it'll come back. But Erica, if it does not, you can certainly you'll get another chance to do it on the via SurveyMonkey when I send out the follow-up email. And thank you for teaching me, Cliff, about dragging down that bar just to expose more of the screen. I hadn't seen that before. I suppose I could go the other way and increase the chat box likewise. Well, I want to thank. We don't seem to have any more questions, and you're seeing the comments, the thank you comments in the chat box. And want to thank you for joining us this evening for yet another webinar. It's going to be a few weeks till our next one, but I hope you'll join us again. We're going to be announcing a number of new ones over the next couple of weeks. So thank you. I hope to see you again. And but apropos to the comments pouring into the chat box, a huge thank you to you, Cliff, for putting together such a session. We really appreciate it.
Well, I thank the audience too, and even if I couldn't take them outside, I think we did okay.
Absolutely. So now I'll get you, Cliff, to go up and turn off the archive for us. Get ready, everybody. It's pretty authoritative.